So Donald Trump met Vladimir Putin in Alaska, and we're getting a lot of fascinating details about it. So let's just jump right in.
There's some real giveaways at the bilateral meeting. Look at the way in which they position their legs, specifically the angle between their thighs. Now, this is what's called manspreading. And what we find is that highly dominant men tend to spread their thighs wide apart. And when we compare Trump and Putin, we find, hey, there's Putin with a much wider spread, in other words, a much greater dominance display. Putin sitting upright, ramrod, looking very confident, whereas poor old Trump is all crumpled and turned inwards. He's obviously got a lot on his mind that's bothering him.
So Trump's got a lot on his mind that's bothering him, and Putin's all man-spreading. So if you need some man-spreading in your life, you have come to the right channel. And it's funny when you sort of think of the stuff this way. You know, you can imagine Putin's like, hey, I'm just going to put my junk everywhere. And Trump's like kind of, closed and is cowering like a kid. I've seen Trump in that sitting position quite often when he's faced with other world leaders. You'll see it, and it's fascinating to point this stuff out.
Well, this is where I think they probably settled most of, let's make up a number and say they had 15 issues they were going to resolve. 10 were probably resolved before the meeting, and there were 5 that were sticky. And I think they got down to just a handful. If you listen to the real language and watch Trump's blink rate as he says we have one that's pretty sticky, I think is the word he uses, there's an indicator that caused stress, and it might be a very large and insurmountable one around how much territory, something like that would be my guess.
It's not just what people say, it's how they say it and what their nonverbals are talking about. So this guy's mentioning Trump's blink rate. I've noticed many things with Trump where his handlers or masters, however you want to call him, is they throw him out there and basically have him read a script. And, sort of everything is directed, right? Hey, Trump, you're going to read this, you're going to shake someone's hands, they'll give you an award, and then you get off stage, right? They'll try to keep it really minimal. It's different though when, say, you're supposed to have a public meeting with the world leader, sort of how he behaves, right? And I've also noticed too, and I've mentioned this before, where term 2 Trump is very different than term 1 Trump. Oftentimes he comes out, tired, low energy. And the blink thing is an interesting one to where, yes, he probably is under a lot of stress. And
I saw 2 guys that were coming together, hadn't seen you for a little while. Good to see you. It was all, all systems go. Couldn't be friendlier on both sides. Trump, the gracious host, Putin thrilled to be here.
Mm-hmm. And then, as you see here, they're walking on the red carpet. Eventually, they kind of saunter off to Trump's limo called the Beast. Putin actually smiling, looking very joyful right there in the back seat, almost like making sure to the cameras, you see me here, right? What do you see there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he from the get-go, and in fact, throughout, he just looked as though it was, this is.
And that was probably the biggest stark difference when you saw the two. So for me, I read that as confidence from Putin, but if you want to read it as joy or victory, however you want to call it, right? It was definitely all smiles. And these kind of things, like, so when you talk to MAGA people, because we always have this conversation when people say, I have to try to talk to my MAGA people about this friends or family about this stuff. Point out these kind of things. Because I know I've already been noticing that Fox News is all trying to spin this stuff as positive, but it's actually really hard to do that.
I would say I think it started off as very enthusiastic, like something great was going to happen. And by the end of it, we saw a little more disappointment with the handshake and the start and the bravo clapping and all those pieces. I think it appeared that things were going down one path, but by the end, there were some very clear sticking points as evidenced by body language.
The sticking point thing, if you guys don't know, it's basically Putin and Russia are kind of asking the same stuff. Ukraine can never join NATO. Ukraine needs to demilitarize. Ukraine, give up the eastern part of your country. Zelensky step down. All these kind of things. The main problem is, even if, say, Europe, U.S., Ukraine agree to all this stuff, Putin could just back out over a deal, and then you're kind of back to square one. So, like, great, how do we enforce said things? So I can't predict how this is going to play out. I do know Zelensky's, I think, meeting with Trump on Monday, and they're probably gonna have more calls with, you know, various allies and NATO, and we'll keep tracking this stuff. But the big problem right now, though, in you know, unfortunately with the USA, is just our leadership is so poor. Much of our qualified staff have, you know, left. We don't have that many experts on Russia or Ukraine working with Trump, because no one good wants to work with Trump. And then his, you know, senior cabinet members aren't very good either. And you guys already know this stuff, so it's frustrating on a daily basis. Plus, you can see the state of Trump. So then, you know, the question always is, well, who's running the show? I mean, that's the legitimate question here.
Well, I think if you watch the entire interchange as Putin is walking up the carpet to him, first Trump claps. I think it's more of a bravo kind of clap. Look, we're together. I think there's hope. And then you see Putin throwing a thumbs up. So there's that back and forth. Putin was clearly more excited about the meeting, or more open about the meeting, more interested in accomplishment. If you notice, he reaches really hard with his hand to Trump. Trump does that classic stand back, wait for him to reach, but doesn't pull him. So I think there's some reconciliation between the two folks going on there.
And there's actually a bit of the handshake analysis, whether you're more aggressive, reaching out for the handshake, or whose hand is on top kind of thing. How hard do you grab? Are you pulling, not pulling?
Right from the start, we can see there's a big body language difference between Putin and Trump. Putin, for example, almost sprints down. He's trying to display to the world that he's energetic, he's got an agenda, he's there to do something important. Trump, on the other hand, emerges from Air Force One, and you can see him staring at the steps. He's very worried. He reaches for the banister, the rail, and goes down one step at a time.
Right. It's really noticeable, right? When you see the differences together, right? The smiles, how they're walking. It's not just an age thing, right? It's an attitude thing. Because theoretically, in Trump's situation, let's say you're old and you're going to go slower, step one at a time, but you could still be smiling and have your head up. Yeah, it's pretty obvious when you watch the difference.
I think that Putin looks like, and in fact, all the facts suggest that this was already a win, arriving there, and then the fanfare and so forth that you see right there, the red carpet. I mean, he couldn't have asked for a better greeting. And honestly, the outcome, this is just a big win for Putin. I think the biggest contrast, Frederica, was the before and after. So when you look at this is all systems go, everybody ready, two leaders that are ready to get some work done. That's the way the body language looked. The afterwards was so much more pronounced with Trump. If you look at the two of them at the podiums, at their separate podiums, Trump was just much more subdued. He was as Putin. He deferred as the host. He defers to Putin. Let Putin start out. Putin goes on into Alaska.
And that was the thing that I noticed. Well, I mean, there's two things when we watch it together live, and you can watch the replay of that. But it was so obvious that Putin was in control during the when they're both up at the podium. And then there was no Q&A, right? Which is really, really strange. My original take on it, as we just talked about in the last video, was that Trump must have really actually thought he was going to get something, right? And then it was just like a massive disappointment. That's sort of how the scene seems to be playing out. So who knows what Trump thought he was going to get other than, gold bars, or, maybe he thought he was going to build a hotel resort in Moscow. Who knows?
One of the things that men often do to women is get their hand behind their back and allow them, for example, to go through the door first. Now, this looks like an expression of politeness, but in fact, it's a dominance display, because it's the person who's in power, the person who's the superior, the person who's calling the shots, who, as it were, guides the other individual and gets a chance to put their hand on their back, the other person's back, as they guide them through the space. And that's exactly what we see here.
So the hand on the back thing is interesting because you can actually do the same motion without necessarily touching someone. And that's something I would actually ask you guys when you direct people, like, hey, how do you do it? Do you always touch someone? Do you only touch certain peoples? And that's something that, you know, if you want to study all of Trump's language, like how often does he touch, and is he always touching everyone? So that, I think that was a good point to bring up for sure.
in the after thing, and he's just
Right.
kind of like, all right.
Almost like,
You know, this
I
is
don't
about
really want to be
restoring
here.
diplomatic relationship. Yeah. So he was, and this time he was like in a candy store, a little guy in a candy, and like, this is fantastic.
And that's sort of what they were saying over on CNN, basically talking about how Putin is small smiles, acting like a kid in the candy store, that this is already a victory. And unfortunately, this is sort of just how it played out.
What's interesting about this exchange between Putin and Trump is the high degree of smiling. It's a very serious, somber occasion, and they've come there to negotiate with some intensity, and yet they find time and the opportunity to smile. And these are genuine smiles, by the way. They're not displayed smiles. For example, we do see a kind of fake smile during the news conference from Trump. It's what I call a flashbulb smile, where there's no smile, it emerges and then disappears.
In the beginning, it's more real smiles. At the end, it's more flashbulb. We don't know what was said in the meeting, but it was clear, you know, when Trump came out, was no smiles at all.
Very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, what did you read there?
Ooh, that's
Ooh,
interesting.
that was
I could get in a
something.
lot of trouble on this one. Not sure what I think about that. I mean, Trump handled it very, very well. It was, no commitment there. But Putin certainly was ready with that. He had planned that. You know, he had.
Uh-huh.
And Trump, yeah, that was, so he got a little reaction there. That's where Trump engaged with him, had eye contact. But the vast majority of the time that Putin was speaking, he did nothing but stare out. The only time he would do a torso turn every once in a while, he would kind of put.
And they were bringing up a good point to where Putin, you know, towards the end of the thing said, next time in Moscow, and, you know, thank you, in English, how that would be planned so that everyone, you know, in the room could understand it clearly, without the translation at all. Whether or not, you know, how you want to read the Trump thing as being, you know, only a body torso turn and stuff like that. But you know, that's certainly a good point to bring up. I wouldn't necessarily, how can I say, read it as something else, because talking about the body turn thing is because Trump is sort of low energy as it is. And no matter what Putin would have said, I don't think Trump would have reacted too strongly, because he's already like probably thinking, I just want to get out of here. I'm getting embarrassed.
Psychological angle on this one. Unconsciously, he's not so worried about falling physically, but falling politically. In the initial handshake between Putin and Trump, there's some extremely interesting information. Putin extending his arm way in advance, showing his enthusiasm, his commitment to the handshake. Trump extends his hand with the palm facing up. That allows the other person, in this case Putin, to get his hand on top. In other words, to be more dominant. But one of the reasons that Trump makes a habit of doing this is that it allows him to flex his bicep and to pull the other person towards him. What's fascinating about the second handshake is that after the pat, and the pat, by the way, is Trump's way of telling Putin that he's the man who's in charge. It's what's called a status reminder. Even after the pat, you'll notice another little shake, a kind of way of reassuring Putin that he's committed to the handshake and that he's very pleased to meet him.
So like all these things that they, you know, pick up with the pats and, hey, this is another signal that I'm trying to be dominant here. You'll notice though, like in this kind of stuff, when you do handshakes with people, if they're coming closer to you or not, if they're holding their ground. Obviously it depends on friendships. And it's funny because when I think about handshakes that I do when I was watching this, I tend to just go more sideways, because I guess that would be more neutral, opposed to I don't really shake people's hands like that or like that. That's kind of strange. So that was my initial thought on that. And I'll be curious for you guys when you're out giving handshakes and you know, talking about this thing as well, as sort of when you watch the movies when the queen, you know, expects you to kiss their hand kind of stuff. So, and you know, I'll just say this. The U.S. situation is bad, but we'll know it's really bad if Putin were to, like, you know, meet Trump and be like this kind of thing, kiss the ring first. But you never know. You never know.
For sure, because the impression is there. Here's an interesting one. Trump rarely gives his hand under another person's hand. He typically takes the top or does a classic handshake and pulls toward you. That shows that he's trying to be a little bit more open to Putin here.
Well, that was two different reads on how often Trump does the thing. And I can't tell you. I don't watch, you know, 40 years of and focus on which way Trump puts his hands. But both of these guys gave you two different reads on that, though. But in terms of how often Trump does it, but they both read kind of the same stuff.
But the two other little gestures, mouth gestures, the mouth purse, it's a form of self-restraint. It's a way of stopping themselves from saying something which has gone through their mind and they suddenly realize, I shouldn't say that. There's another gesture, which we see on numerous occasions, but most importantly, right at the end, when Trump says thank you to everybody for coming along. And that's this gesture. This is what I call the oxbow mouth. In the process, tense their chin, almost as though they believe, consciously or otherwise, that somebody else is going to punch them on the chin. So when you see politicians, or for that matter, anybody, doing this mouth posture, it's quite often because they're feeling vulnerable and unconsciously feel the need to protect themselves.
So it's fascinating here when the guy was mentioning how, you know, Trump was sort of making himself be quiet kind of situation, you know, like that kind of face that he was saying. If you watch Trump in other occasions, he'll actually interrupt people quite a lot, right? And Trump is actually quite rude. However, you know, around Putin or other world leaders, Trump really sort of is quiet, you know? And then you have the situation where being disappointed at the end, like you're going to get punched in the face. I mean, this is sort of how we feel on a daily basis. If you guys watch this, it's like we just watch Trump get defeated over and over again, and then all his sycophants and stuff like that act like he's doing great. But I mean, this is just obvious evidence of what happened. If you think Trump is a great deal maker, so where's the deal? Like there clearly isn't one, and he was claiming that he was all going to solve this in one day. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this stuff. Is there anything that you disagree with, any of these things that were said today, or things that you spotted in the body language that we missed? So I want to hear your thoughts, and I'll catch you all in the next video.